There you go. It was half-grade.
We've got the power now. Good morning, Lions. Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share my story. Let's see.
But it's not as bad.
There it is. Wheelchairs for Kids International is the name of the organization, and my goal this morning is for you to walk away with a better awareness of the need for wheelchairs for children, and that there is a need and there is a solution. I have an incredible story, but that's not what I want you to remember. I want you to remember that as many service organizations around the world that provide help for people, there's also help available for children that have disabilities. World Health Organization says there's 95 million children at any one time around the world who need a wheelchair. It's a staggering number. You would never guess it. Imagine, well, does anyone here have a family member or a child or a grandchild or nephew, someone, a child that uses a wheelchair?
I'm John.
Yeah.
Great.
You ain't a child.
Young and hot.
Yeah.
Most people don't have never really experienced having a family member with a child that needs a wheelchair. A lot of times, what we run into is the major cause is cerebral palsy, which is typically a birth event. When children are being born, there's lack of oxygen. The brain is starved of oxygen, and there's permanent brain damage done. And it's a degenerative condition, but with the wheelchair, the child can live on well into adult years. Without a wheelchair, imagine being born in the developing world and you have cerebral palsy or spina bifida. You cannot vertically stabilize yourself, and you're laid in bed all day, or you're set up and you're slouched. Scoliosis sets in. Any doctors in the house can testify.
No, but I'm scoliosis.
Scoliosis sets in, the curvature of the spine, it damages internal organs. And typically a child that does not get a wheelchair before the age of 15, especially in the very young formative years, 2, 3, 5, 7, 10 years old, will have damage to their internal organs and typically not survive past the age of 15. So they don't survive childhood. Also in the developing world, it's a stigma to have a child with a disability. And it's almost as if you've done something wrong in your life and this is God's curse to you. So in areas where I've been, I found that they'll hide the child. They'll put the child in a back room, and if they love it enough, they'll let it live, and they'll take care of it and nourish it, but just pray that at some point God takes it away so the family's shame is gone and there's no shame. And so yeah, it's a bad thing. So my story starts when I went to work on a military base in Iraq as a civilian. I had a credit card to pay off. 2001, the economy crashed after 9/11. I found myself on hard times putting living expenses on credit cards, ran the credit cards up. Unfortunately, this was my only way to survive, and was able to go to Iraq for a year to pay those credit cards off. But while I was there, I got involved in my off hours. I was working in an Army supply warehouse in Mosul. At the Mosul airport, they'd taken over the base, taken over the airport, put fences 4 blocks up and 5 blocks this way and down at the bottom of the airport. Just chain link fences, and that was our base. You could look through the fence and see the city, and they could see you, which was not always a good thing. But I found myself working in an Army supply warehouse, 92 Alpha, anybody's familiar with the designation. And at night, I had about an hour where I could go to the internet room, I could go to the gym and work on my body, or I could get involved with the troops. And I realized it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to be involved with the troops in that setting. So I did. I went to the chapel, got involved in the chapel activities, movie night, game night, services, Bible study, and was able to one-on-one support the troops. One of the people I got to know there was an Army doctor named David Brown, Lieutenant Colonel David Brown. They were the striker unit out of the Army striker unit out of Fort Lewis, Washington, and they were there for just less than a year, but they were the main unit in that chapel. He was the battalion surgeon. He would ride out with the troops. They actually set up some medical aid giveaways in local schools, bombed out schools. They would take medicine out. People would come, bring their sick kids, their elderly family members. All the doctors had fled to Syria because they were being killed by the insurgents. So imagine a city of 1 million people, very much like a Denver or a Salt Lake City, a river valley city, with no doctors. And then the Americans come and they bring medicine. And he would go out and he would find himself surrounded by families holding children who couldn't walk. And he kept asking the interpreters, what's going on here? Where are all the old people? Where are the sick? I mean, he said, what the doctors have always told the people here is the Americans have a pill for this. You can give them the pill, they'll stand up and walk and go home and lead a normal life. So put yourself in their situation. The Americans come, they come to your city, and all of a sudden there's a doctor down the street giving away medicine. So you're just hoping they brought those pills. And they come and they ask me for the pills, and Dr. Brown's like, there is no pill. What? What do you mean there's no pill? We've always been told there's a pill. So there was a lot of frustration. I saw him one time the day after he came back from one of those missions, and people had been sending me care packages for troops, and I've been passing them along. And some people were saying, who were sending the packages, like, what more can we do? What more significant thing to do? We do socks and toothpaste and DVDs all day long, these care packages. Give us a bigger project to do. So I asked around, and the supply chain had already caught the toilet paper up the front lines, and everything else was really good. I mean, I had pretty much everything we needed. And I asked around, nobody really had anything. I asked Dr. Brown, I said, what do you need? He's like, I need wheelchairs for kids. And he explained the situation. I said, well, I know they're on the other side of the world, and they're expensive. Typically, a pediatric wheelchair here in the US, anybody have an idea of the cost?
Lots.
5 to 40,000.
Oh my.
And they're on the other side of the world, and I'm here to pay off credit cards. I don't know anything. I appreciate the request. I'll send an email home, but I don't expect anything to happen. He said, well, you asked. Well, yeah, I did. So I sent an email home to 40 friends and family, and within 30 days, 31 pediatric wheelchairs showed up at my warehouse.
Wow.
Over 1,000 people back home. You know how people forward emails, and they forwarded 10 friends, and that goes to 100. And a lot of people got involved. Significant people got involved. Invacare sent 15 adult wheelchairs. FedEx donated shipping from U.S. all the way to our base in Iraq, which is over 100,000. So the troops, I had these wheelchairs, but I had no way to go outside and give them away. So troops coming by to get wheelchairs, to get their supplies, would see them and say, hey, we got some kids on our route, can we take those out? They started giving away, and the big red war map in General Petraeus's office down in Baghdad had a little green blip up in Mosul. And he started blowing up phones and saying, what is this? What's happening with this green blip? They all started pointing at me.
Oh.
And they said, he brought us wheelchairs. And so he sent me an email and we started talking. And you can go to the next slide. Sure, stay up with my slides here. So, as it so happened, I found a charity working out of the South Dakota prisons, making a pediatric wheelchair that's adjustable, highly adjustable, for only $250. Nonprofit made by prisoners in South Dakota prisons. So they were sending us wheelchairs to Iraq. USAID State Department's humanitarian arm has free shipping for humanitarian aid anywhere in the world as long as it's American on this side, American on the receiving side. And it's a place where the U.S. military goes, you can ship for free. So they started sending us wheelchairs from the prison factory to Mosul. And they started taking them out and giving them away. And one of my friends I actually had dinner with last week was on Camp Victory in Baghdad, in the command center. And he said on the weekly calls, General Petraeus would tell the commanders all over the country, he said, if anybody's having a lot of trouble, you're having trouble gaining the confidence of your people, you can't get any cooperation in your areas, call Brad. He'll bring wheelchairs, they don't cost anything. So he said that this was the #1 most successful way to win the hearts and minds that they had. In fact, after we would do wheelchair missions, the locals believed that we were actually there to help them, not just blow things up. And they would make phone calls to a special hotline, and they would say, hey, we know a guy who's got a bomb, and he's gonna plant it. He's gonna kill US troops. And they would go and they would take that guy. So it was a very moving thing to be part of that, to be able to help save not only children's lives, but also the lives of troops. The original project was wheelchairs for Iraqi kids. I started in 2005. I stayed all the way to the end of the war in 2012. I came home. During that time, I went on missions with 56 missions. General Petraeus actually let me quit my job. He brought me down to Baghdad, put me up with an Iraqi group, hid me with them, and gave me carte blanche pass to go anywhere in the country, anytime I needed. But I was on my own dime. There was no salary, there was no, I was having to fundraise for the wheelchairs, but he gave me access. And so I went all over the country, going out on missions with different units, 82nd Airborne, 101st, 1st AD, the guys out of El Paso, the guys out of Fort Hood, Fort Drum, a lot of different units. We went out on missions and helped 985 kids in 7 years. So I came home at the end of the war, and I thought, maybe Afghanistan is next. I never really got the opportunity to go to Afghanistan, but after coming home, I just took a year off. After 7 years in a war zone, I needed to decompress. So I took a year off and decided, okay, now it's just time to go back and get a job. And I was like, I've got to give it a chance. So I started Wheelchairs for Kids International, the official 501c3. And that wheelchair factory out of the South Dakota prisons actually moved to Guatemala. It's easier to ship in and out of Guatemala than it is the US, believe it or not. So they went down to Guatemala, they built a factory, they have upgraded their wheelchair design, and they've gone out and they've hired local people who use wheelchairs to build wheelchairs, because they use a wheelchair every day. They're experts. They know how to fix them, they know how to use them, they know what design is best. And they're actually trained to be able to adjust and seat the child properly in a wheelchair. If you don't support every bend and twist properly, you can cause a fatal injury. So through all the therapists and everything that go down there on volunteer missions, these people are expert fitters. So we've been to Guatemala 11 times. We've helped over 500 kids in Guatemala. And because of COVID, we had to stop. We didn't want to be taking COVID down and making anybody sick or killing any, especially kids that have disabilities. So we did get to go to Vietnam. We were invited to go to Vietnam. We helped 30 children over there. 1 out of 7 children born in developing countries are born with birth defects. A lot of them have amputees, conflicts from the war. Children with disabilities in many countries, they can't go to school because they don't have a wheelchair. They're not allowed in school. If they can't walk, the teachers aren't going to carry them around all day. And there's limited availability of pediatric wheelchairs that will support posture and give them the motion they need to survive. This is a story, actually in 2013, I did go back to Iraq. And I got a call, a wheelchair factory outside of Baghdad in Ramadiya had gotten a grant for $300,000 from the State Department to actually build my wheelchair to knock it off and provide 360 wheelchairs out of 300,000 for children in the area. So they built them, and then they called me, they found my number, and they called me here in Grapevine and said, would you come back to Baghdad? I said, no, you'll still cut my head off. And they're like, no, there's, but yeah, okay, that's true. But if you will go to the northern 4 provinces up along the Turkish-Iranian border, that's where the Kurds are. Remember in the 1990s, there was the no-fly zone, Kurds, the chemical weapons were being dropped on Saddam and all that, on the Kurds, killed many families and everything. They said you can fly to Dubai, and from Dubai fly directly up into their capital of Erbil and walk the streets, take a taxi. They find out you're American, they're going to do anything for you because literally the Americans probably saved half of their families. So they'll do anything for you. It's very westernized, very, very safe. You can stay as long as you need to in do wheelchairs. We'll send them to you. So I flew in blind into Erbil and figured my way out, say, to 8 months. Went through villages, knocking on doors, finding kids with disabilities. Village leaders were finding kids they had no idea existed because the families just didn't talk about them. And many families with kids with disabilities now have wheelchairs and come out, and it took away the stigma once they admitted it, and there was an American there to say, no, they are valuable. They are children of God. They are made for a purpose. So it was a big thing. This was a little girl that I helped there. Her dad would carry her every day to school and set her in her chair. They would allow her in school. If somebody would bring her and set her in her chair, nobody was allowed to touch her. There was a really bad stigma. So in recess, she sat there. During meals, she sat there. At the end of the day, Dad would come pick her up and take her home. Once we gave her the wheelchair, and she was able to move herself around, she had spina bifida, then the other children were actually making friends with her and talking to her, and she could go out in recess, and it changed her life. So we established in 2013, working now with D-line wheelchairs in Guatemala. The godfather of pediatric, nonprofit pediatric wheelchairs, a guy named Mark Richard. He's in his 70s, down in Guatemala. He's the one who had the factory at the South Dakota prisons. He's working on getting his wheelchair FDA approved so we can even provide it here in the US. But we are prepared to begin wheelchair assembly and distribution operations in other countries. The factory in Guatemala is starting to ship to Africa and different places. It's a point of origin for a nonprofit wheelchair for the world. And there's opportunity to provide it to other countries. There's opportunities to duplicate that factory in other parts of the world and start helping solve that problem of 95 million children who need a wheelchair. This is an example of the B-line wheelchair. It can hold I have one, I didn't bring it. It can hold maybe a 1 or 2 year old child, and it can be, it's modular, so you can add different pieces, different sizes. You can grow it. It can be a lay-down wheelchair. It can be a bunk bed using the tubular materials. So funding requirements, all that, we will make it happen. I know that different smaller organizations in the U.S. aren't able to come up with 5 or 10 million for us to do this. But if anyone with that, and I have to say this, if anyone with that kind of money does want to take this on as their life legacy, want to fund something like this, or you know someone, everybody knows someone, right? If anybody's got a red job, we'll give them a number. Excellent. So we appreciate the opportunity to come this morning to speak. I'm not a great speaker, but I've got a story to share and I share it from the heart. So, does anybody have any questions?
Do you have,
Hold on.
you mentioned,
Len.
yeah, you mentioned the organization that builds the chairs. Do you have other sources, like with manufacturers, like with used wheelchairs, or that would donate those that you're aware of?
For other manufacturers, they want full retail on their wheelchairs, the 3 to 40,000. So we can help. This wheelchair is 300. We're still getting it for 300.
I want to talk to you about
Okay.
it.
Great. We had let's see, on used wheelchairs, and I already had an offer from a very generous gentleman this morning at the breakfast table. To get a used wheelchair here and ship it down to Guatemala or out of the country, it's actually cheaper to buy a brand new one in that country than to pay that shipping cost. So unfortunately, it's more economical, and we can provide exactly what they need with this custom wheelchair built in Guatemala. But there is still opportunity if there's funding available for shipping. We're glad to take wheelchair donations and send them down.
I was going to comment. I'm certainly in favor of wheelchairs. I have a cousin who, he was a teenager, broke his back, could not walk after that at all, and he can only stand up. He cannot take a step. He can't move his feet. I seen him go through it. Now you were talking about the cost of them. He has a high-tech one now, because now my cousin is about 60. And he's got a high-tech one with $40,000 on it, where he literally can go faster than I can walk. And he can go on rough surfaces. He just can't go upstairs or steps. But the miracle of providing ability for both kids and adults to have a way of moving. A lot of adults lose a leg or two in an accident, or they develop something, a fall, paralyzes them. Would like wheelchairs too. This is a wonderful thing you're doing.
They can provide a normal life.
Yes, they
And
can.
it is a miracle to be able to interact with other people.
Go shopping.
For sure.
See your neighbor.
Otherwise, you're confined, you're bedridden, or you're out. The troops that I actually initially in Mosul that saw those said, we've got kids on our route that drag themselves through, if you can imagine what's in the mud, the dirty streets of Iraq, drag themselves through that and are always sick, and getting them up in a wheelchair is healthy. Plus, when they're driving by throwing out candy, they actually can get some candy.
And as they get older, when they have to be picked up and carried to get in the wheelchair, and a lot of people don't want to do that either.
Right.
My question is, have you contacted these churches that have missions to Guatemala, stuff like that? And can they take, we take glasses in, and we take wheelchairs?
Well, the wheelchairs are already there. If we have shipping funds and we can load a Connex, a shipping container full of supplies, including wheelchairs, sure, we'll take it.
Have you approached the churches and the missions?
The churches that I've found aren't so focused on wheelchairs. They're focused more on the ministry aspect, and I'm glad to involve that too if any church before.
Lions have something called Eyeglass Recycling Center, and you'll have, I don't know how many pairs of glasses go out. You might want to contact the Eyeglass Recycling Center here and have to know that somebody in this audience might be able to help you with that. But you might be able to get to those missions and say, hey, it's just a thing.
Great, thanks. We'll look into it.
So tell us about the picture with the rock.
Did I have one? Is that okay? I kept running out of money. There was an initial surge of money when the troops would come back off missions with pictures. We would provide those. I just sent them home on email because we didn't have social media at the time in 2004. Believe it or not, we didn't have Facebook in 2004. 2005, 2006. So I was sending them by email, and they would send it to their whole list. And I was hearing literally from people all over the world say, "Hey, we want to help with this," but then we didn't have any more pictures, and the money would run out. So I have a friend in Frisco, a fellow alumnus of my university, who would always find a way to help us find money. And he would nominate me for different things. One of those was the Congressional Medal of Honor Society as an above and beyond award for civilians. And I was the Texas finalist for that. And Governor Perry presented me a big award in his office down at the Capitol with that. Another one that he nominated me for was the CNN Heroes Award. And CNN has a humanitarian heroes award they give to a lot of people every year. And a TV show that goes along with it. And I was nominated for that. I was one of the, out of the 10,000 nominations, I was one of the 27. They came and they went out on a mission with us in Baghdad, did a story, and played it every hour for 14 days. And we ended up with over $200,000 in donations on that, just on that one story. And then they called and said, "Listen, you're in the top 10. A panel of 12 judges, Shakira, Whoopi Goldberg, Colin Powell, they looked at all the 27 stories, chose the top 10. I was chosen in the top 10. Said, but you got to come to Hollywood." I'm glad I stayed in Wilshire. So anyway, long story short, went to Hollywood. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, came out on stage, told my story. We played a little video clip, and an independent filmmaker came to Baghdad, and we went out. And so I got to go backstage and talk to him a little bit. That was the only time I talked to him.
It's a wonderful story of service. We really appreciate it.